Uh, do you think we see the seeds of his later persona uh, being planted in his childhood?
Yes, I think I'm less. I see it less there than I do later on. But certainly his mother's raising him less that he was dressed up as a girl because that was really pretty common. Though it's more dressing him up as a twin to his older sister Marceline, and so you see photos not only of the two of them dressed up as little girls with long hair and smock dresses, but you see photographs of the two of them in overalls, very much dressed up as boys. And it was something about her need to see them as twins that confused him. He seems to have conflated being a twin with being of the same gender. So you get
Hmm.
that later on in his fiction with some of his obsession of when two people fall in love that they are each other, so that Catherine and Henry and the son also, and A Farewell to Arms keep saying to each other, I am you, you are me, and meanwhile their gender is becoming more blurred. So I think there's some confusion that happened in his childhood. And of course his mother was a very complicated woman, and there's some question that she might have had some lesbian experiences, and that then feeds into Hemingway's feelings about same sex, about lesbians. He's enormously fond of lesbians for his whole life, and otherwise it's not quite clear why. And so a lot of that came from his childhood. Certainly, all the stories about his hunting and fishing and shooting a game bird and all that need to be put next to the experiences that he had at a very early age with his mother and his sister.
Yeah, speaking of his mother, didn't she? There's, I don't know how strongly we can verify this, but his mother might have had some sort of lesbian relationship with like a student of hers, and at one point they were gonna like shack up together, like literally build like a mini.
Yes.
Yeah, that seems to me to strongly indicate that something was going on that was more than just a student-teacher relationship. No?
Yeah, yes. I mean, to start at the end of what we know later is that Grace and the woman in question had a brief marriage and a daughter. Then Grace and the woman moved in together for the rest of Grace's life. So that seems pretty. But this woman was, in fact, yes, he was a voice student of Grace Hemingway's. Grace Hemingway taught music, and then this woman, Ruth Arnold, became a sort of au pair to the Hemingway children and moved in with the family. And then things went along, but when Ruth turned about 19, something seems to have gone on, and we cannot tell. I mean, the just to digress for a minute, the biggest
Please.
caveat about talking about anybody's sexuality in biographies, we have no way of knowing, unless we have a camera in the bedroom, which we don't. I like to say, and it's actually true, that the only real proof we have of anybody's sexual affair is children. So, if, in other words, if there's a child, we know that they have had sex together, but with a same-sex relationship, you're not going to get that.
Right.
Anyway, so there is no proof. But Grace and Ruth wrote a number of letters back and forth in this one summer when Ruth was, I think, 19, and Grace's husband, Grace's husband, Hemingway, Ernest's father, seems to have found out about it, and he wrote a series of letters. And piecing these together, it's evident that something like that happened. And they do, you're right, about shacking up. Grace wants to build. In the summer, the whole family went to Lake Windermere, and Grace wanted to build a summer house on family land, but sort of on the other side of the lake. And this one summer, she was building it and designing it, and Ruth was helping her, and they were building parts of it that they would enjoy themselves, and it was really to be their shack. And when Ed Hemingway found out about it, Hemingway's father, he it's not quite clear, but he tried to stop it, and seemed to have. Well, Grace built the cottage, and Ruth and she stayed in there together, so it worked to some extent. But anyway, that it seems clear to me that that's what's going on in that relationship. But as I said, we just can't know.
That seems amazing, though. That I mean, especially for this time period, that two people could, like, in the context of a marriage, someone from outside that marriage, a wife and someone else, man or a woman, shack up together in a house, and the husband is powerless to stop it. And Ernest seemed, at least later on in his life, to really hate his mom. He blamed
Yeah,
her for his father's suicide, called her a bunch of
yeah.
nasty names. Um, do you think that there's anything to Ernest's depiction of his mother? Do you think people have been too willing to accept his harsh characterization of her at face value?
Oh yes, because they have been unable. People like to see Grace as having been quote unquote castrating to Ed Hemingway, and even by extension to Ernest. And I think that has to do with the sort of macho legend. He has to hate his mother. But Grace Hemingway was a really remarkable person, and Ernest and she had a lot in common. And I think that bothered him as much as anything. And in fact, that probably fed into his sort of androgynous obsession. Grace was an extremely charismatic woman, and so was Ernest. Both of them, people said the same thing, that they would suck all the air out of a room when they came in. And I think that Ernest was so influenced by her that he had to reject her. And of course, to throw people off the trail, because
Right.
he didn't want anyone following up that how much he might have resembled his mother. So I think, yeah, it's a very complicated relationship, him and Grace Hemingway. He cared really more about her approval than he did his father's, and it was a fraught relationship, fraught.